It is. Your fans are going through the same thing. So the energy crisis is hitting our fans. We don't come from a very rich area, so our fans work hard to spend the money that they do for their season tickets. They're going to have other things to spend their money on, but so are we. And so we're looking after we're paying money to our staff to help them with the energy bills. We're doing that over and above what we pay them anyway. And we are looking at our costs as a club. Funds become very conscious in every decision that we make now, because we don't know what this winter's going to bring. We don't know what costs it's going to be, but we're also really upping the amount of work we're doing in our community, because we know that it's going to hit hard across the whole of the north of Stoke-on-Trent. And so it isn't just us within football, it's everybody, which is why when I see £85.6 million, whatever it is, for transfer fee for one player, I just say, oh my goodness, we've got this whole thing out of proportion now.
And that is why football clubs are so important to our local communities. Carol, go well. I hope your new 3 players are a success. Thanks very much for coming on. It's Friday. For many of us, it is the end of a long week. But what if the weekend began on a Thursday? In South Cambridgeshire, the District Council will vote later this month on whether to switch to a 4-day week. No, not a full working week crammed into 4 days. What they're proposing is a 30-hour week, Monday to Thursday, for the same pay. They'd be the first council in the country to do it. Like many organisations, they faced a recruitment crisis, and they say they've spent twice as much money filling jobs with temp workers as they would have had if they'd filled those positions with permanent staff. Liberal Democrat councillor Bridget Smith is the leader of South Cambridgeshire District Council. She's on the line, as is Anne-Marie Lister. She's from Atton Bank, and they've been one of a number of businesses who've been trialling a 4-day week for the past 10 months. So let me start with you, Bridget. Tell me what is driving this decision. Why did you think it was necessary?
So we've had a really increasing problem of recruitment and retention of staff, and it's particularly critical in an area like South Cambridgeshire, which is a really, really expensive place to live. So in the last year, we've filled about 8 out of 10 of our vacancies. The beginning of the year, it was only 50%. And just in the last few weeks, we've advertised a couple of really, really lovely jobs, one for a landscape officer, and we've had no one apply. So, we have to do something. And as you mentioned on your introduction, filling these roles with agency staff is really expensive, and that's a very poor use of public money. So we've got to do something innovative to solve the problem.
How are you going to assess whether it works? Not just for people who are enjoying a 30-hour week, but for the people in South Cambridgeshire who I'm sure expect a certain standard of service.
Well, of course they do, and actually the evidence from the private sector is actually that productivity and performance increases. So I'm hoping that our communities see us performing even better.
Well, that's where we leave PM for this evening. You can continue listening to the programme by retuning to Radio 4 FM. PM was presented by Christian Fraser, studio direction was by Sam Durham, and the editor was Scott Adam. Now, the shipping forecast issued by the Met Office on behalf of the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency at 1725 on Friday the 2nd of September. There are warnings of gales in Bailey. The general synopsis at midday: low southeast Bailey 1009, losing its identity by midday tomorrow. New low expected Shannon 1000 by same time. The area forecast for the next 24 hours: southwest Viking, southeasterly, backing easterly 4 or 5, mainly fair, good. Northeast Viking, north at Sierra, variable 2 to 4, fair, good. South at Sierra, southeasterly 3 to 5, fair, good. 40s, Cromarty, 4th, Tyne, Dogger, Fisher, German Bight, east or southeast 4 to 6, showers in Cromarty, 4th and Tyne. Humber, Thames, east veering southeast 3 to 5, becoming variable 2 to 4 later in Thames, showers perhaps sundry, good, occasionally moderate. Dover, White, Portland, variable 3 or less, becoming south or southwest 3 to 5 for a time, showers sundry at times, good, occasionally moderate. Plymouth, northwest 2 to 4, backing southwest 3 to 5, then south 5 to 7 later. Thundery showers, fog patches at first in south, moderate or good, occasionally very poor at first in south. Biscay, northwesterly, backing southwesterly 3 to 5, increasing 6 later in northwest. Showers, good, occasionally poor in north. Fitzroy Seoul, westerly or northwesterly 3 to 5, backing westerly or southwesterly 4 to 6, occasionally 7 in North Fitzroy and East Seoul. Rain or showers, perhaps thundery later, good, occasionally poor. Lundy Fastnet, west or southwest 3 to 5, backing south or southwest 4 to 6. Rain or showers, perhaps thundery, good, occasionally poor. Irish Sea, south or southeast 3 to 5, occasionally 6 later. Rain or showers, perhaps thundery, good, occasionally poor. Shannon, northwest, becoming cyclonic 3 to 5, showers, perhaps thundery, good, occasionally poor. Rockall Malin, cyclonic 3 to 5, becoming easterly 4 to 6, occasionally 7 in North Rockall. Rain or thundery showers, good, occasionally poor. Hebrides Bailey, cyclonic 4 to 6, becoming east or northeast 5 to 7, occasionally gale 8 in Bailey, perhaps gale 8 later in Hebrides. Occasional rain, perhaps thundery in Hebrides, good, occasionally poor. And finally, Faroes, southeast Iceland, easterly or northeasterly 4 to 6, occasionally 7 in southwest Faroes and southeast Iceland. Showers good, occasionally moderate. Well, that's the end of the shipping forecast. Now look at the weather for the rest of us. And tonight, Northern Ireland and the far west of Scotland will see heavy outbreaks of rain. Wales will be partly cloudy with scattered showers. The rest of the UK will be largely dry with clear spells. A mild night with a breeze in the north. Tomorrow, much of the UK will be variably cloudy with outbreaks of rain and showers, these falling heavy at times with the risk of thunder. The far northeast of Scotland will escape dry with long sunny spells. The north will remain windy. Well, that's the weather. Now look ahead to tomorrow with John Wilson.
Now one of the world's greatest violinists, Nicola Benedetti remembers how, after starting to play at the age of 4, she was leading the National Children's Orchestra by the time she was just 8.
I remember I was going to say lady, because that's what she seemed to be at the time that was sitting next to me. She was 14, and I felt sort of intimidated by that. I don't think my feet could properly touch the floor. There was no question that was what I must do and had to do and wanted to do.
Violinist Nicola Benedetti on This Cultural Life, tomorrow evening at 7:15 on Radio 4 and BBC Sounds.
Back to tonight, and after the 6 o'clock news, it's our sitcom, starring Miles Jupp as Henry Tobin, Britain's shortest-serving and least successful former Prime Minister. Party's Over is our 6:30 comedy. After The Archers at 7, Screenshot celebrates 40 years of Film 4 with filmmakers who have been part of its rich history. Founded in 1982, Film 4 fostered a reputation for producing gritty, diverse stories from unheard voices, as we'll hear in Screenshot with Eleni Jones and Mark Commode at 7:15. On Any Questions at 8, Alex Forsyth is joined by Charles Courtney, Mark Harper MP, Francis O'Grady and the Earl of Devon. The author Megan Nolan discusses an intense pressure on women writers to be attractive in A Point of View at 8:45, and then Gus Casely-Hayford concludes his look at the hidden histories behind fashion in Torn at 9 o'clock. Just some of the programmes on offer here on Radio 4 this evening.
BBC News at 6 o'clock. This is Alan Smith. Good evening. Unions have suspended strikes that have left bins unemptied across Scotland and would have closed hundreds of schools next week. Council leaders have tabled a new pay offer that would see the lowest earners receive a 10% rise. The government has published legal advice that the parliamentary inquiry into whether Boris Johnson misled the Commons about lockdown parties is fundamentally flawed and unfair. Voting has ended in the Conservative leadership contest. A report on Dame Cressida Dick's resignation as the head of the Metropolitan Police has said she felt intimidated into stepping down by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Russia has said it will allow 2 international inspectors to remain permanently at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant in Ukraine. An inventory of documents seized by the FBI from Donald Trump's home has revealed that dozens of files marked classified were empty. Unions have called off strikes in Scotland that have left bins overflowing and were due to see hundreds of schools close next week. The planned action was suspended after council leaders made a new pay offer to workers. The BBC understands the deal will mean a bigger pay rise for most staff instead of special cost of living payments this year and next. Unions are recommending their members accept the revised offer, which came after an 11-hour meeting that was hosted by the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. Our Scotland correspondent, Lorna Gordon, has the details.
This dispute had seen rubbish piling up in streets and cities across Scotland. The clean-up from the first wave of action had started, but a wider walkout had been due to resume next Tuesday and would have involved refuse workers. Nurseries and schools in some areas would also have had to close. But late this afternoon, the three unions involved in the dispute, the GMB, Unite and Unison, suspended their industrial action. The new offer will see the salaries of lowest-paid council workers rise by around 10%. They'll receive a £2,000 pay rise. Pay increases for higher-paid staff will be capped at £3,000. Joanna Baxter is from Unison.
I think there is a recognition that we have moved things significantly through the industrial muscle of our members and our negotiations with both COSLA and the Scottish Government.
Scotland's First Minister was involved in more than 10 hours of talks yesterday to try to break the deadlock. Nicola Sturgeon said all sides had to compromise in order for a deal to be reached.
I think this is a good deal for workers in really, really difficult circumstances where people are struggling. And obviously, if it is accepted, it's a good deal for the public because it averts any possibility of disruption from industrial action. And I'm particularly grateful to trade unions for suspending the strike action that was planned for next week.
But the First Minister also warned that the Scottish Government budget was finite and that difficult decisions on funding priorities would have to be made to support the revised deal.
More than 560 dock workers are expected to go on strike for 2 weeks at the Port of Liverpool later this month. They're unhappy that their wages aren't keeping pace with inflation, but port bosses say they've offered industry-leading pay packages. The government has obtained legal advice that the inquiry into whether Boris Johnson misled the House of Commons about lockdown parties is fundamentally flawed and unfair. In a highly unusual move, the paper from the crossbench peer and senior lawyer Lord Pannick has been published by the Cabinet Office, raising the stakes ahead of hearings that could lead to Mr Johnson losing his parliamentary seat. Labour has accused the government of trying to intimidate the MPs involved in the inquiry. Our political correspondent Rajdeep Sandhu reports.
In April, the Privileges Committee opened an investigation into what Boris Johnson said in the Commons about breaches of lockdown rules and Downing Street gatherings. He told MPs that he had been repeatedly assured that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken. If he is found to have misled the House, he could potentially be suspended, and that could lead to a by-election where Mr Johnson would have to fight for his seat. Legal advice taken by the Privileges Committee says it doesn't need to prove Mr Johnson intentionally misled Parliament to find him in contempt of Parliament. But that approach has been heavily criticised by Lord Pannick. He was commissioned by the government to give his opinion on the process. He says the approach is fundamentally flawed and unfair, and the committee does need to establish if Mr Johnson knowingly or deliberately intended to mislead MPs. Sir Robert Buckland, the Welsh Secretary, told the World at One here on Radio 4 it was legitimate to debate the parameters of the inquiry.
It's all part of a transparent and open process where the various parties can express their views. And I think it's actually been helpful that we've seen the full advice today, the full position. No doubt it would have been published at some point. It's probably better to see it now.
Allies of Mr Johnson have long been suspicious of the inquiry and branded it a witch hunt. This legal opinion will only strengthen that belief. The shadow leader of the Commons, Thangam Debonair, said the inquiry needed to be allowed to run its course.
This investigation, it was a unanimous request. Nobody voted against it. This government knew what the rules were then. They know what the rules are now. It just feels a lot like, yet again, there's people in this current, and I'm afraid to say future Tory government, playing fast and loose with these rules.
Lord Pannick's legal opinion cannot halt the inquiry, but the paper is expected to be discussed by the panel next week. The committee will be keen to maintain public confidence in its decision-making.
Voting has closed in the contest to choose either Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak as the next Conservative leader and Prime Minister. The result will be announced next week. Here's our political correspondent, Leila Nathu.
Tory members have spent the summer listening to pitches and promises from the two candidates vying to succeed Boris Johnson as the fourth Conservative Prime Minister in a little over 6 years. Now the deadline for casting votes has passed, and Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak will have an anxious wait over the weekend before the result is announced on Monday. On Tuesday, the winner will be formally appointed as Prime Minister by the Queen at Balmoral, the third time in a row that power has transferred directly from one Tory leader to another. While the two candidates have spent weeks touring the country, concerns about the spiralling cost of living have escalated. They've offered little detail on their plans to tackle the issue. Liz Truss promising to cut taxes, while Rishi Sunak wants to prioritise getting inflation down. The Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, said this afternoon the Treasury had been working up options. Whoever gets the keys to number 10 will have to act fast.
A review has heavily criticised the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, for the way he brought about the resignation of the former Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Dame Cressida Dick, earlier this year. The report, commissioned by the Home Office, said communications between the Mayor's office and Scotland Yard were unjustifiably politically brutal. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Daniel Sanford.
The publication of Sir Tom Windsor's review generated an explosive war of words. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, said Sir Tom was clearly biased. Dame Cressida Dick said it was important that politicians did not break the rules. The review was commissioned by the Home Secretary because of concerns about how Dame Cressida had been forced from her job as head of the Metropolitan Police in February. She had fallen out with the Mayor after the publication of racist and misogynistic WhatsApp messages between officers at Charing Cross Police Station. These had come at the end of a terrible year for the force, including the murder of Sarah Everard by one of their own officers. Over the next 10 days, Sadiq Khan demanded an action plan from Dame Cressida, and things came to a head on February the 10th, when he, in effect, forced her to step down by threatening to say publicly that he'd lost confidence in her. Sir Tom said the procedure for removing a police chief had not been followed. Mr. Khan had been unjustifiably politically brutal, and giving Dame Cressida just an hour to decide whether to stand down was entirely unacceptable. The former Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, Sir Peter Fahey, welcomed Sir Tom's view that the procedure set down by Parliament should have been followed.
He's taken a very cold legal look at this situation and said basically the protocol was there in place. It was to try and prevent a situation, as I say, where a politician, for whatever reason, perhaps was he or she didn't like the way a protest was carried out, was policed, or just that he or she did not get on with the Chief Constable, that it was crucial in a democracy to make sure that one single politician could not decide the fate of a Chief Constable. And unfortunately, in this case, that protocol was ignored.
Dame Cressida Dick said that she respected the need for democratic oversight of policing, but wanted people to think about how the London Mayor's office functions.
The former Metropolitan Police officer, who's serving a whole life sentence for the murder of Sarah Everard, has appeared at Westminster Magistrates Court to face 2 allegations of indecent exposure. Wayne Couzens offered no indication of a plea to the offences, which are said to have taken place in 2015 and 2020. He's already denied 4 similar charges. Couzens is due to appear at the Old Bailey next month. Russia has said it will allow 2 experts from the International Atomic Energy Agency to be based permanently at Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. A group of inspectors from the agency arrived at the facility yesterday to carry out safety checks following a number of incidents of shelling nearby. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner reports from the town of Zaporizhzhia, a few miles from the plant.
Radiation blackmail is how Ukraine's president describes Russia's actions at the massive nuclear power plant here in southern Ukraine. His government accuses Moscow of weaponizing the risk of a radiation leak in order to intimidate Ukraine and its Western allies. But Russia, whose forces control the plant, has carefully stage managed this week's visit by international monitors from the IAEA. It's only allowed Russian media to cover the visit, and so far, reports say, the monitors have not been able to speak freely with the Ukrainian technicians without Russian minders listening in. The technicians have been keeping the plant safely running despite numerous incoming mortar and artillery rounds nearby. Ukraine says these are being fired by Moscow's troops, But Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, blames Kyiv.
By striking at the facilities of the nuclear power plant, Kyiv creates a real threat of a nuclear catastrophe in Europe. Under the international law, this is nothing but nuclear terrorism.
Ukraine, meanwhile, is demanding the Russian invaders leave and that the site is demilitarized. Russia, which has been accused of storing explosives inside sensitive buildings, says its forces must remain to safeguard the plant. It's allowed 5 of the international monitors to remain on site to continue their inspection. An agreement has been reached for 2 of them to stay there on a permanent basis. But the fact remains that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is in a war zone. The presence of IAEA monitors may offer some deterrence for future attacks, but no guarantee it won't get caught up in the fighting.
The G7 group of industrialized nations has agreed to impose a price cap on Russian oil as part of efforts to stifle the funding of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. The G7 is hoping to align the cap with the start of a European Union ban on Russian oil imports from the start of December. A court in the US has released more details about government documents seized by FBI investigators during the search of Donald Trump's home in Florida last month. The detailed inventory includes more than 100 secret and top-secret papers. Mr. Trump denies mishandling the files or obstructing investigations into whether he broke the law by taking them from the White House. Our correspondent Gary O'Donoghue reports from Washington.
Some of this information was already known, but this new inventory outlines just how much secret and top-secret information was kept in the president's own office, rather than in storage at his home and golf club Mar-a-Lago. 27 items marked confidential, secret or top secret were taken from the office during the search, plus 43 empty folders marked classified. These were all mixed in with hundreds of other files, books and newspapers, and even some articles of clothing. One reason for the FBI obtaining the warrant in the first place was that it had found evidence, it said, of obstruction in retrieving materials that had been demanded under subpoenas. Previously, the former president had insisted all government documents had been handed back after what his team called a diligent search. Donald Trump is now seeking further judicial oversight of the material removed from his home, arguing that much of it is protected by attorney-client privilege. If granted, and it could well be, that could slow down the investigation significantly, an investigation the Justice Department has already said is in its early stages.
More than 150,000 people in the capital of the U.S. state of Mississippi have been told to shower with their mouths closed as they endure a 5th day without clean running water. The local water treatment plant in Jackson has been damaged by flooding, forcing the authorities to organise the distribution of bottled water, as our North America correspondent Nomia Iqbal explains.
Have a good day. All right, man. Thank y'all for everything, man. Even protecting the country.
For nearly a week now, people in Jackson have been relying on bottled water handed out by National Guard troops who are stationed at several distribution sites. That water is being used for everything, including cooking, flushing toilets and bathing. Kaylee Skinner lives in the city and works for the local newspaper.
For those of us that have water, you can use it to bathe, but you can't use it to cook, to clean, to brush your teeth. So, people are just trying to make sure they don't get sick from the water coming out of their taps. There are spots across the city where people can go get water, but if you were to go to those lines, you'd see they're miles and miles long because so many people are in line waiting.
This is after torrential rain and flooding pushed an already struggling water treatment system to the brink, leaving the water unsafe. But this crisis isn't new. The water plant that serves Jackson has been in a state of disrepair for years. Chokwa Antar Lumumba is the Democrat mayor of Jackson.
This is a set of accumulated challenges that have taken place over the better part of 3 decades. The deferred maintenance, the lack of capital improvements, the failure to have a weatherized system where we have been experiencing hotter summers, colder winters, and more annual precipitation. All of that is taking a critical toll on our infrastructure, and it is resulting in a dehumanizing circumstance for our residents.
He and Mississippi's Republican governor have said they are unified in trying to restore the water service. President Biden said the federal government was ready to provide aid.
People in Argentina have been marching in support of the country's vice president after a man attempted to shoot her at point-blank range. The attacker pointed a loaded gun at Christina Fernandez de Kirchner outside her home in Buenos Aires, but the weapon failed to go off. Here's our South America correspondent, Katie Watson.
Local television footage showed the moment the gunman pointed his weapon at the vice president's head. You can hear the trigger being pulled, but none of the 5 bullets inside the gun were fired, for reasons that aren't yet clear. Amid the commotion, Miss Kirchner initially appears confused. She ducks down to retrieve an object from the ground as people shout, "Be careful." Christina Fernandez de Kirchner is one of Latin America's most controversial politicians. She currently faces a corruption trial after being accused of defrauding the state when she was Argentina's president between 2007 and 2015. If convicted, she could face 12 years in jail. She denies the allegations and had been greeting supporters outside her house when the gun attack took place. Argentina's president, Alberto Fernandez, said it was the most serious incident since the country returned to democracy in 1983.
Podemos tener profundos desacuerdos.
We can have deep disagreements, but hate speech cannot take place because it breeds violence. And there is no chance of violence coexisting with democracy.
Police have named the suspected gunman as 35-year-old Buenos Aires resident Fernando Andrés Sabag Montiel. He's believed to have been born in Brazil. Government and opposition leaders, as well as politicians across the region, have condemned the attack.
There are fears of food shortages in Pakistan after devastating floods inundated an estimated 45% of croplands. The United Nations has warned the disaster will also put a strain on efforts to get vital supplies into neighbouring Afghanistan. Our correspondent Kumza Fulani reports from Sindh province in the south.
We're on a riverbank in Dadu district where the water levels are rising. Flood water is coming down from the mountains in the north and the flooded Indus River, and it's headed towards the hundreds of villages dotted across the landscape. In some places, the water is 8 feet deep. Many families have taken refuge along a dike in Kalimori. Their homes were washed away by the floods. This was the only high ground for miles. There are scores of young children and pregnant women. We hear that one of them gave birth 2 days ago. Her name is Najima Abbas.
We don't even have a tent, just this tree. We spent the whole night in the rain running away from the flood, trying to get to safety. When we arrived, this was the only space we could find here. It gets really hot and he starts crying and won't stop. It's very difficult.
Aid has started trickling into Sindh, but it is slow and not enough. As we walk through this camp, a van delivers bags of cooked rice, and chaos follows. Hundreds chase after it, men, women and children, but many return empty-handed.
The World Health Organization has said it's monitoring reports of a possible new respiratory illness in Argentina after a small cluster of cases. 3 people have died of a mystery pneumonia in the northwestern province of Tucumán. The symptoms have been described as COVID-like, including a high fever and body aches. Here's our global health correspondent, Naomi Grimley.
So far, all 9 people who've fallen ill with this mystery disease are linked to a private medical clinic. Of the 3 who've died, 1 was a 70-year-old patient and the other 2 were healthcare workers. Officials say they've ruled out COVID, hantaviruses, which are spread by rodents, and common types of flu. They've also done a battery of tests on the local water supply and air conditioners to double-check it's not a version of Legionnaire's disease. Professor Sir Peter Horby of Oxford University's new Pandemic Sciences Institute says the key thing will be establishing if there's person-to-person transmission.
At the moment, I'm not overly concerned, but I'd be watching it like a hawk. If in the unfortunate and probably unlikely circumstance that this is a new virus that is emerged and it is transmitting to person, then we'll all have to get into gear extremely quickly.
Since an unknown pneumonia emerged in Wuhan in 2019, the world is understandably nervous of episodes like this. But the silver lining of the COVID pandemic is there's now much better monitoring and sharing of data between the world's scientists as they try to establish how worried we should be.
Latest official estimates suggest COVID-19 infections are continuing to fall in most parts of the UK. The Office for National Statistics says about 1.1 million people in private households had the virus in the week to the 23rd of August, a drop of 25% on the previous week. The Independent Office for Police Conduct has criticised the Wiltshire Force for missing opportunities to bring a double murderer, Christopher Halliwell, to justice sooner for killing a 20-year-old woman, Becky Godden. Wiltshire Police have issued a formal apology to Ms Godden's family. Here's Phil Mackey.
Christopher Halliwell killed Becky Godden in 2003, but there wasn't a murder investigation at the time. Instead, she was treated as a missing person. After he was arrested for the murder of another woman, Sian O'Callaghan, in Swindon in 2011, Halliwell took detectives to the remote rural location where he'd buried Becky Godden. But officers failed to follow procedure, and he couldn't be tried immediately for Ms Godden's murder. He was eventually convicted in 2016 after new evidence was found. Today's report by the IOPC says that systemic weaknesses at Wiltshire Police meant the investigation was poorly progressed, lines of inquiry weren't pursued, and evidence wasn't properly examined. A key soil example on Halliwell's spade wasn't forensically looked at for 3 years. Karen Edwards, Ms Godden's mother, said failings by officers investigating the murder of her daughter were unbelievable, but that she was elated at the report's findings. Wiltshire's Police and Crime Commissioner, Philip Wilkinson, says it was clear the report would be damning.
Pretty horrified, but I knew it was coming, and I have been determined since I took up this role that I needed closure in the most appropriate fashion for Karen and in order to see justice done.
The force's current Chief Constable, Keir Pritchard, who was in charge of all serious investigations at the time of the inquiries into Becky Godden's death, has said sorry for what happened. Wiltshire Police said it had already taken action following recommendations made by the IOPC.
Buckingham Palace has announced that the Queen is to miss a traditional highlight of her summer trip to Scotland. It's understood she won't attend the Braemar gathering tomorrow because of her ongoing mobility problems. Prince Charles will still attend the event, which features Highland games, including tossing the caber. From Balmoral, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
With a head of state who is 96 and who's known to have what the palace describes as mobility issues, which prevented her attending several events during the Jubilee weekend, any change in her normal routine inevitably gives rise to some concern. However, my understanding is that there has been no significant change in her health in recent weeks. The Queen will not attend the Braemar Highland gathering tomorrow, normally a fixture in her summer calendar, to preserve what sources describe as her comfort. She will remain at Balmoral, where she's been attending to official papers and seeing members of her family, and where on Tuesday she will fulfil her constitutional role as head of state and receive the outgoing and incoming Prime Ministers.
8 climate activists have been arrested after staging a protest inside the House of Commons. 4 of the demonstrators glued themselves together to form a ring around the Speaker's chair. The parliamentary authorities said there would be an investigation. Members of final salary pension schemes could see the future value of their payouts reduced after the High Court backed a change to how inflation is calculated. The government wants to phase out the Retail Prices Index, which is used by some private pension providers, and replace it with a different measure of inflation that's been consistently lower. Our personal finance correspondent Kevin Peachy has more details.
The Retail Prices Index, or RPI, has been used as a measure of inflation since the 1940s, but the UK Statistics Authority now regards it as inaccurate and obsolete. It plans to replace it with its newest index, known as CPIH. This could have an impact on millions of private sector pension scheme members because CPIH is consistently lower than RPI. Currently, the pension many of them receive goes up in line with RPI each year. Also pegged to RPI are index-linked gilts and bonds, popular investments among pension funds themselves. Their potential fall in value by billions of pounds is likely to have been the main motivation for a legal challenge by 3 pension funds to the Statistics Authority's plans. The trustees argued the authority and government acted unlawfully and failed to properly consider the impact of their proposals. The judges disagreed in a decision welcomed by the Treasury. But there may be a more pressing issue facing pension savers. Some final salary schemes have a ceiling on their inflation-linked annual increase. With inflation soaring above 10%, pension experts say such caps could take effect and reduce the real value of pensions next year and beyond, whereas the change to RPI would only hit home next decade.
In the city, the 100 share index ended the day up 133 points at 7,281. On Wall Street a short time ago, the Dow Jones was up 37 points at 31,694. On the currency markets, the pound is trading at $1.15.2, and against the euro, sterling is at €1.15.6, and that makes a euro worth 86.6 pence. Premier League football clubs spent a record £1.9 billion in the summer transfer window. 9 of the 20 clubs each paid out in excess of £100 million. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss has been looking at the numbers.
Even by football's lofty standards, the statistics are staggering. Premier League clubs smashed the previous spending record by £500 million. Chelsea alone spent £250 million, more than any British club in history, while even newly promoted Nottingham Forest signed some 21 players. The contrast with spending on the continent is just as remarkable, with the Premier League summer total greater than the Spanish, Italian and German top divisions combined. Tim Bridge from Deloitte Sports Business Group, who compiled the figures, says the Premier League boom is mainly the result of fresh TV money.
We're coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic at the same time as the Premier League clubs are entering a new broadcast cycle. So the Premier League clubs have security over the amount that they're going to receive for the next 3 years, and that's increased on previous amounts.
But the figures also highlight the growing financial gap with England's lower leagues, which were more seriously affected by the pandemic. Some clubs there have already expressed concern about the cost of using floodlights in the winter months. Deloitte has warned that in the current economic climate, financial stability off the pitch should be as much of a focus as success on it.
A freak accident has ruled the England cricketer Johnny Bairstow out of both the third test against South Africa and the 2020 World Cup later this year. He says he needs an operation on a suspected broken leg after slipping as he played golf in Leeds. A swimming cap designed for afro hair has been approved for use in top-level competitions a year after it was banned from the Olympics. The specialised covering, which is larger than traditional caps, can also be used by people with dreadlocks, weaves and braids. Tim Muffet reports.
Young black swimmers said they were disappointed and heartbroken when FINA, which governs swimming, banned the specialised caps from top-level competitions last year. Their manufacturer, Soul Cap, said at the time that FINA had told them the caps wouldn't be allowed because they didn't follow the natural form of the head. Afro hair is naturally drier than other hair because it has fewer cell layers. Sodium hypochlorite, or bleach, which is often used in swimming pools to kill bacteria, can dry it out more and cause damage. There were fears the ban would discourage black people from swimming, but FINA has said that following a review of the decision, the caps will be permitted in competitions around the world. Alice Deering was the first black woman to represent Great Britain in an Olympic swimming event. She believes the decision sets a precedent for the sport.
It doesn't have to be a barrier anymore. You don't have to be afraid of thinking, oh gosh, how am I going to get this on? This is going to be a stressful situation. It's nice now knowing that it shouldn't stop them from learning to swim or going swimming.
Almost 30% of white British children take part in swimming, compared with around 20% of black children, according to a report published by Sport England in 2020. The makers of the swimming cap said they hoped the decision would bring down some of the obstacles that are keeping swimmers from this sport.
The headlines again. Unions have suspended plans for more strikes next week by refuse workers across Scotland and a walkout by non-teaching school staff after council leaders made an improved pay offer. Legal advice commissioned by the government says the Commons inquiry into whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament is unfair. A report on Dame Cressida Dick's resignation as the head of the Metropolitan Police has said she felt intimidated into stepping down by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. In the past hour, Russia has said its gas deliveries to Germany through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline won't resume tomorrow as been planned because of a technical fault. The World Health Organization says it's monitoring reports of a possible new respiratory illness which has killed 3 people in Argentina. BBC News. Read this evening by Alan Smith.
Next, on a mission to find his fortune, Radio 4's fictional former Prime Minister will be heading back to his old stomping grounds. Comedy with Miles Jupp in just a moment.
Brewdog CEO James Watt built a £2 billion business on fighting the establishment and living by a punk ethos.
We bleed staff here. We are uncompromising.
They were punk, disruptors, relentless. They were out to shock.
I had to source humanely killed squirrels.
Behind their meteoric rise, there was a culture crisis brewing.
People were having panic attacks. People were crying behind the building.
I had 10-15 minutes to pack up my desk. Good ship, Brewdog. Listen now on the BBC Sounds app.
Now on Radio 4, the final episode in this series of Parties Over, where the former Prime Minister Henry Tobin's luck might just be about to change.
Parties Over by Paul Doolan and John Hunter.
Okay, so today's emails. The electricity bill's going up.
Again? I might switch back to paper bills. At least that way we could burn them for heat.
And you've had some more payments come through. £100 for your appearance on TV's Greatest Blunders.
I don't remember recording that.
Oh, no, you didn't. They just wanted to use footage of that time you trapped your tongue in the budget box. Oh, and there's an invoice for your appearance on Times Radio last week.
An invoice? Don't radio stations usually pay the guests? Not the other way around? God, I should have known with the Murdochs.
And a bill for